One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to the Three Technique. I am Trey Reeves. I'm joined by Mr. Garrett Turney. On the other side of the Metroplex, Mitch Mason, not with us today, earning some well-deserved time off for cranking out that NFL draft content. And that man's working overtime, Garrett. You can check all that out on a lot of it on our YouTube, some of it on this here podcast feed that you're listening to us right now. But as we are counting down the days to the NFL draft, as we are working our way through the college football offseason, he's working really hard, working on the NFL draft, working on some other stuff behind the scenes. So a well-deserved day off for our friend Mitch today. Garrett, speaking of days off, how did you survive the ice apocalypse that we experienced in the Metroplex this week?
I survived it barely, and mostly because my wife is good at cooking and making things happen at home. No, it was really great to have some time at home, obviously, with this DFW ice apocalypse stuff that you people who listen to us up north would definitely laugh at us for, because we get a little bit of ice on the roads and then everything shuts down. I get it. Call me when it's 100 degrees up there, and we'll talk about that. But no, it was a fun week off. It was fun to get to sit and kind of crank out a little extra content and see you guys apparently really like the Dallas Cowboys. So thanks to everybody who subscribed after that. We really appreciate that, and welcome into our podcast and getting to hang out with us talking some college football, and if you like it enough, maybe a little bit more Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, if you're new here and you were brought in by the NFL draft content, have no fear. We are going to keep churning that out for you guys. As I mentioned, Mitch is working really, really hard on that. But we are a college football show first and foremost. And yeah, I agree. As the temperatures dropped this week, we found ourselves, huddled up inside, finding some ways to pass the time. I played a lot of NCAA 14,
Oh, yeah.
definitely got caught up on work, all kinds of good stuff. And I agree. Super thankful to a wife that knows how to cook, because,
Oh,
man,
yeah.
I didn't have to get out and gasp to our northern listeners. 27 degrees with a little bit of ice. I know, so cold. I know, we're Texans. We have a lot of bridges down here, guys. It's not
We
safe.
do.
Don't know how to drive. So it was best for everybody involved for us to just stay inside. But as the temperatures in the Metroplex and across the nation dropped, some news started to heat up this week. So, Garrett, we're going to start with our news break. And a couple things to get to here today, because we had a couple of coordinator hires, one really high profile one. We get an ending to the Jaden Rashada saga that we'll talk about here in just a second. And then we will kind of not just glaze over National Signing Day, because we did have National Signing Day last Wednesday. I know it's easy to forget about with the transfer portal and with the early signing period, but our traditional February National Signing Day was this week as well. So we will kind of do our best to recap that. Well, let's start with the top news of the week, and that was kind of breaking late over the weekend. Tommy Rees is going to leave his alma mater, leaving Notre Dame. He'd been the offensive coordinator there since 2020. He is going to leave and take the exact same job at Alabama. He will become the new offensive coordinator for the Crimson Tide, taking the place of Bill O'Brien, who's returning to the NFL. Garrett, I know a lot of Alabama fans are really happy to see Bill O'Brien go. I think that kind of goes without saying. I don't think the coordinators, we've talked about this a lot. The coordinators were an issue for the Crimson Tide this year. I think that's well below the standard that they had set with their both offensive and defensive coordinators this year. But let's talk about this hire of Tommy Rees, because there's a couple different ways to look at it. I think, let's start with the Crimson Tide perspective. What can Alabama expect to get in their new offensive coordinator?
Well, I think the thing that you're going to have to look at as a Bama fan is you're going to get something a little bit more predictable and a little bit more maybe something that you've been used to in the past. Just kind of breaking down some of his numbers. Let's look big picture for a second. So he took over as the Notre Dame offensive coordinator in 2020. Of course, that was the COVID year, so you can make an excuse one way or the other if you want to. But just the numbers. In their successful season where they go ACC championship game, they were 30th in scoring with 237 passing yards, 211 rushing yards that year. They had a really good year running the football. Then 2021, they finished 20th in scoring with 282 passing yards, so a pretty good bump, and then 144 rushing. And then, of course, last year, 42nd in scoring offense, 207 passing, 189 rushing. A little bit of that was out of necessity. You can say that they're maybe a little bit of a victim of circumstance of their personnel. Obviously, had some quarterback issues last year. Counting on Tyler Buckner to be the guy goes down early, so of course, then you turn to the backups and try to piece together some kind of season from there. But Notre Dame was a far cry from being a talented program, right? Maybe a little bit of issues in the quarterback room, but they were the 10th most talented team according to 24/7 last year. So I don't think that the personnel argument is going to really work. That's one of the big things that, as a Bama fan, you guys have been probably thinking this last week. Bama fans have been thinking, okay, well, when he gets to Alabama, he's going to have better personnel. The team's going to be a lot more talented, and he can, his scheme will look better with our players. That might be the case. There's a big difference between 10-1 in terms of just national talent, but at the same time, you are breaking in a new quarterback. We're not 100% sure who that's going to be yet. And you are going to be breaking in a lot of new skill talent around him, too. Obviously, the portal was not kind to some of Bama's top end talent. And so I don't think that this is a sky is falling situation for Bama. They're still Bama, and they're still going to be a successful program who recruits well. But I do think there's some cause for concern to say, okay, well, this guy hasn't necessarily shown an ability to be explosive in the way that we've seen some of our previous coordinators be. Obviously, Bill O'Brien didn't exactly work out the way they'd hoped to, but guys like Sarkisian and Kiffin before him were a lot more dynamic with the ways that they got the receivers the ball. This is definitely more of a tight end focused passing offense. I was looking at their stats. Let me pull these up real quick. Their stats last year, their leading receiver was their tight end with 67 catches, and the next highest receiving number was Lorenzo Styles at 30 catches. So less than half the catches coming from the wide receiver position to their tight end. So they're going to force the ball to the tight end. They're going to run the football. It's going to be a lot more smash mouth. And if you're a Bama fan, you have to hope that with your personnel, with your size, your physicality, you're going to be able to get that done.
Yeah, and by no means is Bama going to be worried from a talent perspective. We'll talk about their
No.
recruiting class this year in just a second. And oh boy, like it is loaded as it always is. But yeah, I don't think you can look at the last 3 years for Notre Dame's offense and use the word dynamic. I don't think they haven't been awful. They haven't been, embarrassing. They certainly haven't been dynamic. They've really struggled to get the ball into the hands of their best playmakers. They've had talented wide receivers come through there. They've had some 4-star guys come through there, but haven't necessarily done the best job of getting it in their playmakers' hands. I know all year long we were just questioning, what are we doing, especially at the beginning of the year. You
Mm-hmm.
know, yeah, the quarterback has been an issue as well. When you're looking at Ian Book is the best quarterback that Tommy Reese has ever worked with,
Yeah.
and I think we kind of refer to him as Ian Chapter around here
That
sometimes.
is true. That is true.
It's not worth calling him the full book, but from a Bama perspective, I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a huge drop off from offensive coordinator standpoint from Bill O'Brien to Tommy Reese. Don't know that's going to be necessarily an improvement either. I think it's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
push between those two for me personally. Notre Dame, though, if you're a Notre Dame fan waking up this morning, listening to this show, kind of processing this news that you've lost a legacy quarterback, guy that played quarterback for you, lost him in, I mean, some people in Notre Dame fan base are calling it a lateral move. I don't think it's a lateral move to go from Notre Dame to Alabama. Maybe maybe they're thinking just in job title alone, it's not getting a promotion. But either way, for a program as storied as Notre Dame, it's a little embarrassing to get a coordinator plucked by Alabama, right?
No, yeah, for sure. And uh, the lateral move is not correct. Last time I checked, the last Alabama offensive coordinator got a job in the NFL. So maybe not a lateral move to get to a place where you're kind of at a launch pad for your career to go off. And then what was it? The guy before him got a job at Texas, and the guy before him got a job at Ole Miss. And I don't know. I think maybe there's a chance that that these offensive coordinators at Bama get a little bit more of a boost in their career than being a guy at Notre Dame. Not to upset any of the Notre Dame fans that listen, we love that you're here. But I do think Notre Dame fans, for you guys have to be really excited about the future and the optimism here, right? This it sucks losing a guy that's a legacy. Don't get me wrong. It sucks more from the emotional level of like, okay, well, this guy was our quarterback and now he's leaving us. And so I get that. And it kind of feels like a bit of a betrayal. But at the same time, you guys have an ability to bring in a almost whoever you want to based on the way that Marcus Freeman appears, at least in terms of leadership, right? He seems like a guy who is really easy to coach with, a guy that you'd be excited to coach with. And be excited to work with, and all the things that Notre Dame has to offer, as well as just Marcus Freeman and his coaching style and his leadership style. So I think they're going to be able to land a really good offensive coordinator, maybe a guy who's already taken a job somewhere else, and be able to kind of pull him away. I saw a lot of people talking Phil Longo and being able to pull him. I think that would be awesome if they could pull him away. Not necessarily calling that, I don't have any insider information on that happening, but I saw that as a name tossed around. If you pull Phil Longo over, I think that would be fantastic. And I think you're going to be able to get a guy with some sort of pedigree with that. So, Notre Dame fans, I think it's time to kind of take a breath, understand, yeah, it's upsetting. You lost a guy you were probably excited about, but you have a chance to replace him with someone really good. And regardless if you get a home run hire, if it's just some up and comer or something like that, I still think the direction that Marcus Freeman is pushing the program is something to be excited about. They pulled in a pretty good recruiting class, and I think they're going to be able to really capitalize on some of this momentum to be able to continue to build the program with all this new stuff with NIL and conference realignment and everything else. I think Notre Dame's in a great position.
Yeah, and it'll be fascinating to see who they can lock down. Whoever they do lock down will be able to call plays for Sam Hartman, which is certainly an amazing selling point. Really excited to see what he can do in
Yeah,
South Bend as well. Let's move on to the Jaden Rashada saga because it got a huge closing of the book over the
it did.
weekend. Jaden Rashada is an Arizona State Sun Devil. So if you haven't been following the story, Garrett's going to kind of roll through the timeline here in just a second, but it's been all over the place, man. He's committed to Miami, then commits to Florida. We have the NIL fallout where he was, promised $13 million dollars and didn't get that $13 million dollars and got out of his national letter of intent. And now he becomes a guy that I think could possibly be a day one starter in the Pac 12 for Arizona State. So, Garrett, take us through this timeline first and foremost. And then what does this mean for the parties involved, specifically Arizona State and Florida?
Yeah, so just looking at the timeline, and we're gonna stay zoomed out because there's so many specific details that we could go
So many
into.
twists and
We,
turns that
we
we
could
can
almost
really
do
zero in.
20. We could do 20 or 30 minutes on this if we wanted to, but we have more pressing issues to get to as well. But basically, middle of the summer, he makes his original decision to commit to Miami. He commits to Miami over Florida, over Texas A&M. I think Bama had an offer out there. And that he was one of the guys that you were looking at saying, okay, I think he was an Elite 11 guy. And so he was, widely considered one of the better quarterbacks there. And you want to get a guy like that. So he commits to Miami, done and dusted, we're fine. And that's how it stayed through most of the fall. But of course, Miami has maybe a little bit of a worse season than we expected in year one. And, not that Florida was necessarily, beating the brakes off of teams, but maybe not as embarrassing as some of the stuff that Miami went through this last year. And in the early November period, Rashada decides to flip to Florida. Now, what we learned afterwards is there was a deal promised through the Gator Collective that was also going to pull money from other sources for $13 million to get him to commit. And that's basically how we got that to happen the first time around. So that's kind of how he ended up committing to Florida. Now, that deal fell apart in December. Apparently, whoever was leading that collective, they sent sort of a notice saying like, we're not going to be able to fulfill 13 million. Maybe they were out over their skis a little bit there. And they just said, you know what, deal's going to fall apart. But that didn't end up coming out, or none of that news came out until January, when he doesn't show up to the early move-in day for Florida, right? He was even a few days before that at the All-Star games, the Senior Bowl stuff, not Senior Bowl, whatever they call it, the Under Armour games
Under
and all
Armour game,
those.
yeah.
Yeah, he was there, and he's taking pictures of Florida commits, and saying like, "Yeah, I've already started to learn the playbook, looking over formations, and we're doing
Saying
that."
all the right things, I would
Yeah,
say.
it sounds
Yeah.
great. If I'm a Florida fan, I feel fantastic. We got our quarterback of the future. I'm thrilled, right? From there, you have to go and say, okay, well, what happens next? He gets released from his NLI after some drama and all this news about the collective and the 13 million starts coming out. He gets his release, and then through the end of January, he takes one unofficial visit to TCU and then signs with the Sun Devils. And so, for me, I'm looking at this and saying this couldn't have been more than just some conversations over a phone, plus probably, if this is the way that it went, probably some collectives and some money involved, and getting a deal straight to say, yeah, this is where we're going, which I'm not upset about. And I want to be clear. I think Jaden Rashada is the kind of guy who is going to have drama follow him. And I think that's a little unfair. I do think he's going to get a lot of bad press, and there's going to be a lot of, home fan bases that want to trash on him for his money and whatever else. If you're a talented athlete and they're offering you money, go take your money, right?
Yeah.
That's if somebody put 13 million in front of me, I would switch schools like that, right? There's almost no issue with doing that kind of a switch for me. So I don't want to trash on the kid. I don't want this to be a thing that we continue to rag on him about. To talk about where his career is going, I think he is a day one starter at Arizona State. I think he is absolutely going to be the guy to come in there and kickstart Kenny Dillingham's stint with Arizona State, however long that goes. And that's a massive boost because they've gotten some good, big guys in the portal. They've gotten some, some more splash plays, and considering where this program was maybe 12 months ago, the fact that you get a top quarterback to commit to your school out of high school plus a bunch of guys in the transfer portal, I think you have to be thrilled if you're Arizona State. This is a bad look for Florida, though, right? I mean, this is just a rough look for Florida to not be able to come up with the money, to not be able to, get that money together from your Gator collective. Now you've got Graham Mertz, solid quarterback, but definitely not anything to, get massively excited about based on what he's shown on the field. So you have a quarterback, but you're probably looking at this as a massive opportunity wasted, and that's kind of where, I don't know if this belongs in the recruiting segment, Trey, but this maybe is a little bit more of a transition. Does this kind of stop the collectives race, and maybe, or maybe not stop, but maybe put a pause to it and say, hey, if we're not going to be able to deliver on massive promises, and if you're going to start to see some of these collectives fall through, is this going to maybe make the offers more realistic? Maybe make universities more hesitant to extend an offer based on a collective? I mean, what are you thinking on the NIL approach going forward?
I keep hoping that NIL is going to police itself. And I keep being disappointed in that hope. So,
Yeah.
look, I would hope that this would be a tale of caution for these collectives, but the people that are in charge of these collectives are in those positions because they're bold and they're a little bit reckless and they have a huge desire to see their program succeed. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like these people that we're talking about, most of them are really great businessmen, but I just am not sure that they are thinking rationally because they're not really thinking, it seems like, from a business perspective, they're thinking more like sports fans. And what we know about sports fans is they
Yeah.
do not think rationally and they're kind of just doing whatever it takes to make their team have a leg up. So
Right.
initially I was hoping that these collectives, this structure would be kind of run more from a business standpoint. Like, is this a good investment? Is it a good idea to give a 18-year-old kid $13 million? And I think most people thinking from a business perspective would say, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. Even if they're the best, pass all the background checks you want, like look like the best slam dunk athlete in the world, they're still 18 years old. And I
Yeah.
don't think that offering $13 million to an 18-year-old is a good idea. But it seems like we're not thinking like business people or investors. We're thinking like sports fans. And that's going to be really interesting. Now, I love what you said about Rashada. He's going to take a lot of heat
Hmm.
throughout his career at Arizona State. If he decides to transfer, he's going to take even more heat, even though 1,000 guys are going to transfer
Right.
whatever year he decides to transfer if he does. It's not him that should take the heat. It is 100% the grown men that offered
Yeah.
him the $13 million and then could not back up that deal.
Yep.
If that's what actually happened and it looks like it is, they're the guys that should take the heat. The heat should be directed to Florida. I absolutely agree with you. If I'm 18 years old and I'm offered $13 million, dude, I don't care if you're telling me I have to go play in, another country.
Yeah.
I could go play in the CFL for all I
Yeah.
care. Like, sign me up for that when I'm 18 years old. I do not blame him one bit. And every single person that's going to be making fun of him for that would have done the exact same thing as him.
No,
So
absolutely.
if you're considering making fun of Jaden Rashada, maybe redirect that to some folks down in Gainesville that should have some more heat on them for
Yeah.
that.
Well, and my biggest hope for this is that this does kind of slow down what's happening with the collectives. I think collectives are great. I think the players should get paid for what they're worth, right? I think that they should be. And if you can come up with a lot of money because you got a big donor base or whatever else, great, do it. I have no issue with that. I don't think this has to be some equal thing with a salary cap and everything else. Like if you can get guys their money for the fact that you're selling out stadiums and bringing in lots of cash and whatever, like great, do that. I have no issue with that. What I'm hoping though is that these crazy numbers that mostly have been made up, not in every case, not in this case, but in a lot of cases, the accusations we could think back to last year with A&M and their $30 million class, which was thrown out by some random message poster on a board sliced bread. Like we can go back and talk about all of that, right? But a lot of these numbers being made up, I think, hurts the long run because it. And we talked about this a lot last summer, it just kind of hurts the players' abilities to know what's really out there and to have a
100%.
good, accurate idea of what they can expect coming out and getting into college. So, I think that this will probably start to slow it down now that we see some of these inflated figures start to default or, not follow through or whatever it is. And I think once you start to see that, it'll start to regulate itself. It's not going to happen soon, but I think as these collectives start to lose some credibility, it'll reflect better for the players maybe that have been there a little bit longer and they'll know what to expect so they can kind of set the expectations there.
Let's take a look at the rest of these classes because, like I said off the top, we did have a national signing day on Wednesday. I know it's been overshadowed, and it's still called National Signing Day. I think we should probably refer to it as Late Signing Day, and the real National Signing Day is the quote unquote early signing day in
Yeah.
December. But we did still have quite a few prospects, and we kind of that were making their college decisions. And now we can kind of close the book on the class of 2023 and look at how everything shaped out. Again, this is just taking into, I'm going to rattle off some numbers here in just a second. This is just looking at high school recruits, right? So the transfer portal is a completely different thing. Everything I'm going to about to say here is taken from the 247 composite on 247 Sports. And as to no one's surprise, Alabama's going to take home the top class. They came just shy of A&M 2022 A&M's all-time record. Nick Saban was on a tear this year. It looked like
Hmm.
he was absolutely just out for blood on the recruiting trail, looking to prove that hey, his dynasty is not going anywhere, much to the chagrin of the rest of college football. So Alabama by far signs the top overall class. 27 out of 28 of their signees were blue chip recruits, 4 or 5 stars. Garrett, their 1 3 star was the number 3 kicker in the nation. And if you don't follow recruiting, kickers for whatever reason cannot be rated higher than a 3 star. Like no one rates them higher than
Yeah.
a 3 star. So if they were rating him on his value at the position, he'd probably be a 4 star at the least
Right.
as well. Um, Garrett, Alabama machine just keeps on rolling. Any thoughts on their class this year?
My biggest surprise here is not the fact that they did so well. Bama signs these classes. They finished this class with no offensive and defensive coordinator.
Yeah,
That's how they closed out this class. They didn't announce this coordinator until after signing period for Tommy Reese, and so they just got their offensive coordinator. You'd have to think maybe there was some conversation about the list of guys you might be playing for, maybe, but I mean, outside of that, they didn't have any coordinators sitting there, not even filling the void to have those last minute conversations with guys and do those last minute in homes or whatever you're doing. So the fact that they're able to do that without the coordinators, I think, is a massive testament just to what Alabama has built. And obviously, they got a little work to do if they want to dethrone Georgia, who has taken, I think, the seat at the top of the SEC. If they're going to dethrone them, they're going to need a class like this.
yeah. That blue chip ratio is only going to go up. It looked like couldn't possibly go any higher. But when you sign 27 out of 28 as blue chip recruits, your blue chip ratio is only going to go higher than it
Yeah.
already is. Rounding out the rest of the top 10, the aforementioned Georgia Bulldogs came in at number 2, Texas Longhorns at number 3, Oklahoma at number 4. Really surprised by that personally.
Yeah.
Brent Venables did a heck of a job on the trail this year. Ohio State comes in at number 5, LSU at number 6, Miami at number 7, Oregon at number 8. Tennessee Volunteers, off their best season in a long time, cap that with a number 9 ranking. And Notre Dame comes in at number 10. I think a lot of Irish fans might be disappointed by that class because for so long Notre Dame was number one. They took off running in the 2023 class. Marcus Freeman made it a priority to make some splash commits. They lost a couple of their top guys, and they end up at number 10, but still nothing to be ashamed of. If you're a Fighting Irish fan, I think that's a fantastic class heading up to South Bend. Garrett, is there anybody in that top 10 that really stands out to you or surprises you or, positively or negatively?
I mean, first off, Tennessee being able to make it back into a top 10, they don't typically recruit at the top. They do pretty well, but they don't typically crack into those like upper echelon top 10 classes. I
Usually
mean,
top 20, but yeah, not top 10.
yeah, no, and be able to sign a top 10 class after the season you just had, I think, is a massive bravo to what Heupel's been able to do there. And also, just I mean, like you said, Oklahoma. I mean, not even just the season that they had, but Venables. Some of the comments about like, "Don't even talk to me if you're committed somewhere else," or if you're going to commit to me and you take a visit somewhere else, then you're not committed to me. Like some of those comments, I feel like would rub me the wrong way if I was a high school recruit, but didn't seem to matter to a lot of these guys because they ended up signing a really good class anyways. So I mean, hats off to them for what they're able to do. I don't understand what Venables is doing up there at Oklahoma at all, but he seems to have something going right. So we'll see if it translates to on-field success the next couple years in the Big 12. So I don't know what'll happen there for them. It's a confusing time to be a Sooner fan.
Some other top storylines. We talked about Jaden Rashada becoming an Arizona State Sun Devil. Probably the biggest headline of the day was Nicholas Harbor, the number one athlete and number 19 overall recruit in the class, commits to South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So huge pickup for Shane Beamer there.
Yeah, big.
They're two four-star linebacker twins that had a lot of recruiting. The recruiting world was following them really closely. Andrew Harris and his twin brother Andrew Harris and his twin brother Michael. Both four-star linebackers. Andrew commits to UCF. Michael commits to Maryland. A lot of people thought they were a package deal, but they do split up, and a huge pickup for Gus Malzahn to get Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Some other pleasant surprises, like I mentioned, South Carolina with the addition of Nicholas Harbor moved all the way up to number 16 in the composite rankings. Nebraska, number 24. Usually those transition classes are really tough, so credit to Matt Rule for holding the class together there. And Texas Tech, we talked a lot about their recruiting class for this year on this show. I know it had been a little bit higher, but they didn't lose any of the guys that they really wanted, I don't think. And they picked up a couple four-star guys. They finished at number 26. I'm really happy about that for the Red Raiders. I think that's going to be a really fantastic class. That's a solid building block out there in West Texas. I want to talk about some cause for concern, though, Garrett. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
rattle off some teams here. Your Michigan Wolverines, number 18.
They
I
are
say
mine.
that in jest. I
Yes,
apologize.
yes.
Garrett, we've talked a little bit about Michigan recruiting on here, and personally, I'm shocked after back-to-back playoff appearances that they're number 18. What do you make of that?
Look, I mean, in the Christmas gifts episode, right? While we were getting these different teams for Christmas, I said that I was going to get them a bunch of banners to let the high school players know that they're actually good and they've won
Right.
the Big Ten a couple of times. Like I went through that whole thing about how do they not know? I think the biggest problem for Michigan recruiting right now is the fact that Harbaugh doesn't seem to commit to being there. Regardless of if he should or shouldn't, like I'm not saying that he needs to commit to Michigan. He doesn't necessarily owe them anything. But if he is going to continue to coach there, and if he's trying to leave one foot in the door, one foot out the door, at some point he has to commit and say, I got to recruit a little bit better to keep this success going, and if I want to start competing at the upper levels and win a playoff game. So, I think Michigan certainly has some work to do in their leadership department. And just making sure that they have everyone on the same page and everyone with the same memo for how we're going to attack recruiting. But 18 is definitely not the number you want for them. And I know you were saying it in jest, but obviously, if you are going to be rooting for Michigan, if you're going to be a Wolverines fan, you love the success you've had the last couple years. But there has to be a little suspicion that, okay, with less experience, with some of these guys leaving for the NFL, at what point are we going to be able to keep developing these maybe not as highly touted players into NFL talent? Like, at what point are you going to start to see that drop off? And then there's not that success year to year, and then you don't win the game against Ohio State, you don't make it to your conference championship game, right? At what point does that start to fall off?
Yeah. And another thing that's a little bit concerning for me, didn't sign a true quarterback, or at least one that projects at the next level. They got Jack Tuttle from Indiana out of the transfer portal, but
Yeah.
signed a couple high school kids that played a little bit of quarterback in high school, I believe, but
Mhm.
none that really project to the quarterback position at the next level. Little concerning for me. Personally,
Yeah.
that's just a program building preference for me. I want to see you sign a quarterback at least every year, and
Yeah.
preferably a blue chip guy that can actually compete for reps. Other probably concerning outcomes, all from the Big 12. Oklahoma State at number 54. They just seem to be bleeding talent right now. I know that Mike Gundy has never really competed for an elite top 20, top 15 class. He's been up there a few times, but he's not like a perennial recruiting power in Stillwater. Number 54 with no blue chip commits is a little concerning to me, especially with all the talent that they lost in the transfer portal. And then the Big 12 newbies. I just, it's going to be really fun to watch them build their programs and get to recruit off of, being in a Power 5 conference. But right now, it's going to be a little bit of a tough transition for the four teams transitioning to the Big 12 next year. UCF had the best class of those four at number 49, followed by Houston at number 56, BYU at 65, and probably most shocking to me, I know Fickle left, but Cincinnati all the way down at 79
Mhm.
with only 11 high school kids signed. So, and it
Yeah.
wasn't like that they got this amazing transfer class either. I think their transfer class was ranked in the 50s. So, like as you're
Yeah.
transitioning to a Power 5 conference, that's not a huge influx of talent that you're bringing with you.
No, yeah, and Fickle leaving obviously devastated that class. I think
Yeah.
that they would have finished higher, and I think didn't a bunch of them end up following him and kind
Lots
of
of them,
committed
yeah.
later. Yeah,
Several guys went to Wisconsin with him for sure.
and so that kind of that sucks. I understand, with some of these teams just coming in, maybe it's hard to believe that they're going to be able to perform well in the Big 12. And so they're saying, well, I don't want to go somewhere where I'm going to lose a bunch. I think that they're going to have to win now, right? I think the UCF Twitter mafia has been talking a lot of trash about what they want to do and that whole thing. And look,
And they found out that it's not even easy to do Twitter in a Power 5 conference.
apparently, yeah, no. And so I hope that they succeed. I think UCF succeeding in the Big 12 would be so much fun. And I think having like a fourth power program in Florida would just be awesome for the chaos in that state and just whatever's happening there. But I do think that, all of these teams are going to have to win quickly and they're going to have to find ways to beat some of those. I don't want to say middling, but just some of those teams that have been struggling to kind of grab that foothold and take advantage of whatever this new look Big 12 is going to be. You're going to have to win some of those games over some teams that are maybe a little bit lower on the totem pole and start to kind of establish yourself as, hey, I'm actually the next sort of competitor whenever Texas and Oklahoma leave. So that's definitely got to be what they do. One of those teams, though, that is, I think, middling right now is Oklahoma State. You mentioned them. There were some issues towards the end of the season with some of the, maybe I think the emotions around Gundy and sort of considering, I don't know if he ever ended up pulling the trigger on it, but firing the offensive coordinator there and, didn't want to do that. Close friend, like, didn't want to have to go that route. And then obviously with some of the portal and everything else, that's just not something he seems interested in. Not big on the recruiting, not big on the portal stuff, and so I think it's hard when you have so many talented players leaving through the portal, and then you're not going to recover that. They're built on building their culture and having established guys play as seniors and as juniors. When you have so many of those guys leaving, I think the approach has to change. I'm not saying Gundy has to go, but he has to change whatever his philosophy is for building his program, or else he can't succeed long term in Stillwater.
I totally agree. And I think just sitting here in February, you're telling me what team in the Big 12 is going to maybe take a big step back next year. It might be Oklahoma State. I know
Might be,
TCU would
yeah,
be really easy to pick them off of their highs and losing all the talent that they are. I'm concerned about what's going on in Stillwater, to say the
yeah.
least. One last thing on the recruiting front, just looking forward to 2024 real quick. I'm going to rattle off the top 10. Georgia's running out in front of everybody. They're kind of running away with the top class of 2024. Obviously, it's way early, but they have 10 commits with 2 5 stars and 7 4 stars already.
Wow.
So, yeah, taking care of business on the trail. Notre Dame's number 2, LSU at 3, Florida State at 4, Alabama checking in at number 5. And then the back half of the top 10 is really interesting to me, Garrett. South Carolina,
Hmm.
Texas Tech, Michigan, who we talked about, struggling a bit. They've already got 5 4 stars committed. Oregon and Florida round out the
Wow.
top 10 early, very early top 10 for 2024. It's going to be fascinating to follow that and just see where all these dominoes fall for next year. But Garrett, as we transition into our last segment of today's show, we want to have a little bit of fun. And obviously, if you follow football at all, you're aware that there is a big game. I'll say that to avoid trademark infringement. It's a big game coming up next Sunday. And we got the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. We're a college football show. Obviously, we're not going to go really in depth of breaking down that matchup. There's so many podcasts you could listen to if you want that. But we thought it would be fun to kind of take a look at some of these top performers of these two teams this year, both on the offense and defensive side of the ball, and kind of rate them on how surprised we are of, how surprised are we that they are in a position to be a contributor on a championship team? How surprised are we that they are heavily contributing to not just a good team, but a championship caliber team in the NFL based only on their college career. We don't want to talk about their journey in the NFL. We're going to kind of reminisce a little bit and look at their college careers and say, okay, based on when they were drafted, the college career that they had, how surprised are we that they are in the spot they are right now? And tons of fun. We had a ton of fun just pouring over these
Hmm.
rosters and thinking back to some memories. We saw a lot of these guys in person when we were in college. All of them we saw on TV, I'm pretty sure. So just really fun to watch a lot of these guys and just kind of reminisce over their college careers. It also ties in really, really well to our draft coverage that we are wanting to promote a little bit as well. So shameless plug there, but let's jump in, Garrett. We only disagreed on one player.
Yep.
That player is probably the most important player in this big game. Jalen Hurts, the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. Do we want to claim Bama? Do we want to claim Oklahoma? That's for folks to decide. But he was a standout at both of those places, obviously. Whether you think he was built by Bama or a Sooner for life, Jalen Hurts. Personally, we had 3 categories here: not surprised, decently surprised, and outright shocked. I put Jalen Hurts that he's in this position, quarterback of arguably the best team in the NFL this year. I am pretty much outright shocked that he is in the position that he is. You were not surprised at all. So we are on 2 opposite ends of the
Right.
spectrum. Personally, for me, when Jalen Hurts was coming out, obviously his college career was fantastic, right? He, led Alabama to a national championship game. I know that he was pulled in the fourth quarter for Tua Tagovailoa. The rest is history. Then he goes to Oklahoma and he's a Heisman contender, and he's one of very few guys that have ever done it at 2 power programs in at quarterback. The list might be him. I'm blanking of anybody else that's done it to the level that he did at 2 different programs. But all the time when I watched him, I thought, great college quarterback, awesome player, really fun to watch in college. I don't know that he's going to translate to the NFL. And that's why I am outright shocked that he's in the position that he is. I know the stats. I know that he was, great at both places. But man, I personally am just shocked that he is in this position.
Yeah, no, I personally have no surprises here. The Jalen Hurts is here. Maybe this early on in his career, I'm a little shocked that he made it this quickly. But it seems like something clicked there in Philly, and the offense is humming and everything's working out there. So I'm not necessarily shocked that Jalen Hurts is here, though. When we talk about and going back to some of our draft coverage and what we're doing there, a lot of the things that you're going to hear going into the draft almost every year is going to be some of those less proven quarterbacks, but you talk about their measurables, right? You talk about, oh, they got a cannon of an arm, and oh, he's fast, he's athletic, we can build something around that. That's Jalen Hurts, if you're asking me. The only difference there is with a lot of these quarterbacks, guys like this year, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, we haven't really seen them succeed at the collegiate level. So while we might believe in arm strength or the ability to learn and read the field and make good reads and everything else like that, and we want to think that we're building the next Josh Allen here, the reality is we haven't seen a lot of those guys succeed at the college level. Jalen Hurts, I mean, he was extremely successful at Alabama. He would have been the starter for a championship if it wasn't for the fact that he scored a little too quick against Clemson, and that gave them just enough time for what was it, Hunter Renfro that backed into the end zone there, and
It was, yeah, and
yeah,
Alabama
so
fans are screaming right now because of, pick play,
yeah,
but,
pig play. Yeah.
yeah,
But I mean, pig play. If you want to say stole, okay, I'm going to say that they won it, but whatever. It stole a championship because he led them on a game tying, winning, go ahead drive towards the end of that game. Just ended up leaving a little too much time on the clock. And then to go to Oklahoma and to be as successful as he was, you look at some of the guys that he learned under, coached by what Sark was the offensive coordinator at Alabama when he was there, and then coached by Lincoln Riley. Those are two great offensive minds to learn from, to be coached by, to understand what an offense looks like. And the way that the game is changing in the NFL, biasing towards athletic quarterbacks who can make something happen, who it's not just a straight running quarterback, but a guy who can make accurate throws, deliver the football with some oomph, and then if the play breaks down, extend the play, scramble, find something. That's where the game's going right now in the NFL. It's where it's been heading the last 5 or 10 years. And I think that, I mean, Jalen Hurts is built for the way that the game is right now. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, I'd have told you there's no way. But just who he is and the game that he's playing right now, I'm thrilled for him, excited for him. And I also think that this just makes sense to me that he would be here. He was the number one dual threat guy coming out of high school. You
yeah,
could have almost predicted this just coming out of his high school career, that if you're the number one dual threat quarterback, probably more times than not, you'll find your way to success in college and get a chance in the NFL. So I'm thrilled for him. I'm not surprised at all that he's here. And as far as what school gets to claim him, I mean that's a funny Twitter conversation, but I think both can personally. I don't see why one school has to claim him or the other one. I mean, if we're limiting it to where he finished his career, then are we talking about the Texas A&M legend Trevor Knight? That's I mean, it was 1 year, right? He had the majority of his success in his career at Oklahoma. Then he comes over to A&M for a year and has a fun time. But I don't know. It's
yeah, and
y'all
that
can both claim him. He's
it's
good.
really interesting because it's not like Joe Burrow, right? Like,
No.
obviously, Joe Burrow started his career at Ohio State. Ohio State's never gonna try to claim, I'm sure some people on Ohio State Twitter will try to claim, but
There have been a few.
yeah, there's always a few in every fan base, but no reasonable Ohio State fan is going to try to claim Joe Burrow because all of his success was at LSU.
Hmm.
With Jalen Hurts, he had legit success. He went to back title games at Alabama. So
Yep.
it's a really unique situation. I don't really blame. It's kind of funny to watch Alabama claim Jalen Hurts. I don't think if he was in the if he wasn't in the Super Bowl, I don't think they would be standing on their head to claim him
Yeah.
as much as they are. But it's just kind of funny to watch because of how many guys that Alabama could claim. But look, I don't really fault them for it. He was a big part of those championship caliber teams.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the one player we disagreed on. Garrett, let's move into the guys that we were not surprised at
Hmm.
all. That they're key contributors, key members of the championship team that they're on. Let's start with the Eagles. Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, and Miles Sanders. They're kind of core
Hmm.
skill position players. Obviously, Devontae Smith won a Heisman as a wide receiver
Yeah.
at Alabama. I was shocked that he fell as far as he did in the NFL draft. Scouts thought he was undersized. You could look at his tape and say that was bullcrap, that he was going to be fine, right? AJ
Yeah.
Brown, the exact opposite, just a monster human being. Him and DK Metcalf tearing up defenses at Ole Miss
Hmm.
was just frustrating to watch if you're a fan of one of the other teams, but just really fun as a casual college football fan. And then Miles Sanders. I think this is the most interesting one to me because personally, Miles Sanders got really overlooked because he only got 1 year as the guy at Penn State. He's kind of like he was the backup to Saquon for his first couple of years. And then he gets 1 year, his junior season. He is the guy, and he stole the show, man. Like he was just lights out, arguably like did things that, Saquon Barkley was also doing. Not trying to argue that he's better or worse than Saquon, but the offense didn't really take a huge step back. At least the running game didn't when it was Miles Sanders instead of Saquon Barkley. So personally, I'm not shocked that he is a key contributor and doing so well for Philadelphia.
Yeah, no, and I mean, just kind of going through these guys. Obviously, we started with Devontae Smith. If you win the Heisman and you have success in the NFL, I don't think anyone's going to be shocked at that. But I do think it kind of goes to the funny bits about the NFL draft process and saying, "Oh, he's a little undersized." I'm like, "Yeah, but he won. Like he won. He succeeded." Did you call the corners he was beating undersized or like
Right.
a little slow? Like, no, he was beating these guys at the highest level. So,
And he
I
was
think,
doing it his whole career too.
yeah.
Like he was the guy on the other end of the aforementioned Tua Tagovailoa miracle to win the national
Yeah.
championship. I
Well,
think
and I
as a
think
sophomore,
and
right?
people were just shocked by it because, the bigger names, the Jalen Waddle, the Jerry Judy, those guys, those are the guys that people paid attention to instead of Devontae Smith. Because yeah, he's a little undersized. Yeah, he doesn't come with the freaky athletic plays that everybody else did. Then you get to see him be the focal point of their offense, and turns out he's pretty dang good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Devontae Smith, not shocked at all. AJ Brown, I mean, I remember, obviously we're Aggie fans. I remember a sad Saturday at Kyle Field watching him just get chased by corners. I just, just remember him running around the field, doing whatever he wanted to, getting 10 yards of separation on the corners we had out there. There's just no answer for him. And I remember just sitting there watching him like, man, I sure hope he gets drafted to my team. And man, I sure hope he ends up with someone that I like in the NFL. And, obviously, goes to, I think it was Tennessee first, then traded to the Eagles and, gets to go and be successful. So fantastic for him. And then, yeah, Miles Sanders, mostly just because he kind of got sandwiched there, right? Like he's preceded by Saquon. And then obviously they've had some success here this last year with more maybe touted running backs, but he was kind of just one of those guys that got forgotten in the middle. And I don't know how he got forgotten. He was extremely talented. He averaged something like 6 or 7 yards a carry while he was at Penn State in his only year as a starter. He scored like 12 or 13 touchdowns, something along those lines. Like not small numbers. And they maybe didn't have the success they wanted to that year, but they're a solid squad with him there. And he was a good piece while he was there. I honestly am a little surprised he's not better utilized as a member of the Eagles. He's definitely come on in the playoffs towards the end of this year, but man, it just seems like if I had a guy like Miles Sanders, he would be one of my go-to guys if I'm calling plays. I'm saying, let's get him on a swing route. Let's get him on a little angle route out of the backfield. Let's set up screens all the time for him. And that would be my first game plan if I'm the Philadelphia Eagles. So not shocked by any of those guys making differences at all.
Yeah, anybody that's had Miles Sanders in fantasy is just like punching their their podcast player of choice right now in agreement with you. Garrett,
Yep.
this is AJ. Just back to AJ Brown real quick. This is AJ Brown's sophomore and junior years at Ole Miss.
Okay.
160 receptions, 2,572 receiving yards, and 17 touchdowns.
Amateur. Just
That was
terrible.
good enough to be the That's good enough to be the 51st pick in the draft, apparently. I don't know what the other 50 teams ahead of them
I
were.
don't know what they were thinking, man. That's a good
Good
receiver
grief,
right there.
what a steal by the Titans in that draft.
Yeah.
A couple other guys in that not surprise category, Creed Humphrey, the center for Kansas City, center for Oklahoma, just an anchor for that offensive line that was so good under Lincoln Riley, as Oklahoma was routinely winning the Big 12 and making the playoffs. And TJ Edwards out of Wisconsin. I believe he was a second round pick, the linebacker. Dude led Wisconsin in tackles every single year that he played, freshman through senior year. Just an absolute stud in the middle of the field. And obviously, he's still, playing at a Pro Bowl caliber level for the Eagles as well, leading them in tackles year in and year out. Just a couple of studs that I think everybody when they were drafted said, yeah, that's an amazing pick. Let's move into the decently surprised. And the first couple of these guys are going to be, people are going to shake their heads at us. And it's Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelsey. Remember, guys, we are looking just at college career, right? And we're not saying that we're shocked that these guys are in the positions that they are, but we're talking about two all time greats. And if you are honest with yourself, When Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelsey were coming out of college, you probably did not think, unless you're just the biggest Chiefs fan in the world that was hyped up on the Kool-Aid, you did not think that they were going to be potential first ballot Hall of Famers, goats at their position, right?
No, yeah, I mean, if you're a Chiefs fan looking at this, and this is the case, right? So if you're a Chiefs fan, the year I think his rookie year, that he wasn't even the starter, right? His rookie year in the NFL, it was Alex Smith, and he had a good year, and I think they even made the playoffs and might even won a game or something like that. But we're not an explosive offense, right? Alex Smith is good, solid player, not explosive. Then he comes in, and I think that's a testament to what his college career said. He wasn't ready to be a day one starter in the NFL. Right? He wasn't ready to do that. He clearly was developed and had a lot of success in his rookie year that proved that they could let Alex Smith go on to a different team. But where he came out, I mean, he was great at Texas Tech, had some massive performance. Then he had like the 600 or 800 yard passing game where everyone was just putting up crazy numbers. And I can't remember who they played, but that was it's a game where it was stupid Madden numbers in terms of just like what
I
you
think it was
actually put out there.
Oklahoma. I think it was him and Baker Mayfield, right?
It might have been, yeah. And so he has a game like that, but I mean, it wasn't like Texas Tech was crazy relevant on a national stage. It wasn't like he was out there. And remember, teams traded up. The Bears traded their entire future away to get Mitch Trubisky
Yes,
in
they
that
did.
draft. Like
And that's
they
why.
thought that was the case because they thought that him having 1 year was a better bet than what Pat Mahomes was. And I mean, just looking at the draft tape, I couldn't kind of blame him. I didn't think Pat Mahomes had a massive future in the NFL coming out of college just because I thought he was just another kind of gunslinger, run up the numbers in the Big 12 because they don't play great defense at that time.
And he
So,
played in the air raid offense. Like
yeah.
had up to that point had never seen a quarterback from that offense in college like go on to great success in the NFL.
Right, and it's just like, and there were better ones that had done it in that offense, and better people that had played even at Tech in that style of offense. And so I just think that if you're being honest with yourself, you didn't think Pat Mahomes was going to be insanely great, right? You might have thought that he would have been a good quarterback, maybe a solid contributor. You put some good pieces around him, he could do something. But you probably, if you're just being honest with yourself, didn't think he was going to be that guy, right? Now, obviously, he's the face of the NFL now, right? He's one of the best quarterbacks that probably we've seen, and I think by the time this is all said and done, he's probably, I think, conservatively a top 5 quarterback of all time. We could be talking top 3, maybe best ever by the time it's all said and done. Who knows what this guy's career has? Coming out of college, I mean, I don't think you can make that case. You mentioned Travis Kelsey as well. I mean, what do you want to say about Travis Kelsey besides just the fact that he was an average sized and just pretty stereotypical sized tight end. He was athletic, but this was kind of before tight ends were really that athletic. The stereotypical tight end was a slower guy with good hands who could just kind of catch a ball and fall over. I'm thinking, a Dallas Clark type, a guy like that. Not going to too deep of a cut there, but just a guy like that. Even a guy like
The tight end was viewed as a safety blanket position, pretty
yeah,
much.
and I mean, you can go into a lot of different guys that did stuff like that, but I think the ability to be a stretch tight end that wasn't really that big of a deal until maybe the last 5 to 10 years, right? With Gronk, kind of being a good example of the stretch tight end, you can kind of play him off the line of scrimmage, get him on a mismatch, and just see if you can toss it up on a seam route or something like that. And I think that Kelsey has thrived in that position, whereas maybe again 15 years ago he may not have had what it takes to be a massive contributor, but they've made him the focal point of their offense. And Mahomes to Kelsey is a massive connection. And just looking at some of his college stats, I was looking here at his senior year, averages 14.8 yards per catch, 10 touchdowns. Great stats in terms of what you're looking at from a tight end position, but that's not the kind of thing you would think of as a stereotypical tight end, right? You don't think tight ends should average 14.8. You don't think the tight ends are going to get 10 touchdowns in a college system, right? Where the tight end's not very, not very focused on. And so their ability to use him in a lot of different creative ways and to use some of that athleticism, I think has been a massive bonus to them. Personal fantasy owner of Travis Kelsey over here, thrilled to have him on my fantasy team in these dynasties. So, I'm happy for him to be able to succeed. But yeah, I mean, coming out of Cincinnati, you don't expect that to be the place to get the biggest, baddest, most athletic tight ends. And so, good for him. Good for him to make it in the NFL as far as he has.
And his brother Jason as well, coming out around the
Yeah,
same
for sure.
time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, just a huge, awesome, great draft picks by the respective teams.
Yeah.
Other players in the decently surprised category, Kadarius Toney, coming out of the draft a couple years ago, he was a first round pick by the Giants. I don't know, like he was kind of the forgotten guy of that prime trio, right? Like it was
Hmm.
Kyle Trask, Kyle Pitts. Oh yeah, and we have this guy Kadarius Toney as well,
Yeah.
and he really bursted on the scene. Travis Kelsey, we didn't, bursted on the scene as a senior. Travis Kelsey, so did Kadarius Toney. He really
Hmm.
wasn't a huge part of the offense until his senior year. He's kind of a gadget player, but really positionless, I would say. His first couple of years in the Florida Gators program. Then that 2020 season, he burst onto the scene. It's a shortened year, but he still almost has 1,000 yards, scored a ton of touchdowns, and was just really, really hard to cover. Nick Bolton is the other guy, and I watched a
Yeah.
lot of this guy. Being an SEC fan, watched a lot of this guy at his time in Missouri. He was a great linebacker, a great college linebacker, but he was 5'11", little bit undersized. I think he's up to 220 something now, but back then he was, smaller. Now he's the leading tackler for the Kansas City Chiefs and
Yeah.
like a key part of that defense. I'm decently surprised that both of those guys are having the success. I know Kadarius Toney has been plagued by injuries. Man, I think next year he could be a huge, huge, like one of the best receivers in the NFL next year.
No, yeah, I mean that's definitely on the table. He's plenty athletic enough to do it, and I think we saw a lot of that at Florida. Obviously, with the Chiefs moving on from a lot of players, and it seems like they've only drafted the maybe slightly undersized but really fast guy. It seems like that's the guy that they just draft for their offense. But I think he's the cut above of that group. I think and I don't think that's surprising seeing him the way he played in college. I think that's a massive testament to who he was. That despite the fact that he was overshadowed by Trask and Pitts in that offense, neither of those guys are playing in the Super Bowl, and that maybe has more to do with their franchise that they're with, obviously. But I do think that Tony being this key of a player surprised me a little bit, but definitely not a shocking thing when you really dig into the numbers and you look at the skill set.
Moving on to our last section. These three guys, we were just outright shocked that they are in the position that they are. We're going to start with the most obvious, I think. Isaiah Pacheco, guy that was a seventh round pick out of Rutgers last year, now finds himself the starting running back for the Kansas City Chiefs and a dang good one at that. Like he is making plays out there and kind of been a godsend for the Chiefs this year as their draft pick choice of Clyde Edwards-Helaire just hasn't really worked out how they thought. He's a 4-year guy, 4-year starter at Rutgers, so that's a good pedigree there, but none of his numbers ever really wowed you. He averaged 5 yards a carry his freshman year. After that, it was 4.3, 4.4, and 3.9.
Hmm.
Never had more than 7 touchdowns in a season. That was also his sophomore year. So, man, like more power to him. I don't know what Rutgers was doing up there, what kind of blocking. He obviously didn't have great blocking, obviously didn't have a ton of talent around him in Piscataway, but dude's blossoming and just really and he's in an offense obviously with Andy Reid that is letting him show all of his skills, but shocked. Like just absolutely
Oh
shocked,
yeah.
right? That he is
Well,
such a big part of this offense.
and I'm gonna be honest, I don't watch a lot of Rutgers football. I know that might sound
Why
shocking.
not, Garrett?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I don't get those channels, the Big Ten 7 or whatever they are. I don't know where they play their games. They just you don't see a whole lot of Rutgers where I'm from. But
Not getting a lot of Herbie and Fowler from
no,
Piscataway.
not a lot of primetime matchups on ESPN for the Rutgers there. But um, I mean, even if you just want to go back to it, it's not like Pacheco was a massive reason to watch Rutgers either. Like you said, he didn't produce that much. It wasn't like he was a wow factor player
He
who
was a fine
you,
college player. Like
yeah,
a
like
fine college
not
player.
saying he was bad. Not saying he was bad. There's a reason he got drafted, right? But you get drafted in the seventh round as a running back because people are taking chances and taking flyers, right? They're saying, "Ah, he's pretty athletic. He was okay. Let's take a chance on him, see what he can do. Set him on a practice squad, something like that." And to be the starter, and to be the guy for them, I think, I mean, massive testament to his work ethic and what he's been able to do. But yeah, you can't tell me that you aren't shocked that he's here, right? Especially considering the guys that he had to climb over. Yes, they dealt with injuries, but the guys he had to climb over to get to this spot, I mean, he's solidified himself, I think, in this offense going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about fantasy. Proud dynasty manager Isaiah Pacheco here. Checking in. Um, Last two guys, a couple defensive guys, Chris Jones and Josh Sweat. Um, Not necessarily shocked that they are contributors on a good NFL team, but shocked that they are leaders, right? Like shocked that they are
Mhm.
key elements of the defense. I'll start with Chris Jones. Coming out of Mississippi State in 2015, I believe was his last year there. Dude was a people eater, right? Kind of on the inside of the D
Mhm.
line. He was on those really, really good Mississippi State teams with Dak Prescott. Never really like the standout guy on the defense, though. He was a second round pick. His most tackles he ever had in a season was his freshman year. He had 17 solos and 15 assisted for 32, 44 total tackles his senior year or junior year, excuse me, as well. He had 3 sacks his freshman and sophomore year, 3 each. Mostly, I mean, he's a great player, but he's when you're a people eater on the inside, you're kind of lucking into those. Gary, he has 15 and a half sacks in the
Yeah.
regular season for the Kansas City Chiefs this year and is just dominating fools on the interior of that defensive line. Awesome. Like more power to you, dude. I did not expect that coming out. He was not like a big can't miss prospect. He went high in the second round. I don't think he was necessary. I think it was kind of like as a people eater, what he had been in college. And in the same way, Josh Sweat at Florida State, I think you were looking up the stats on him. Like his
Mhm.
highest sack number was 7
Yeah,
in the
so his senior year, he had 5.5 sacks. He had 14 and a half his entire career over 3 years at Florida State. He's got 11 this year. So
yeah.
almost matched his college total in a single season. And it's not even like it's his, first year out. I mean, he's been in the league for a couple of years, but to finally start to blossom like this, I mean, massive props to him. I love seeing these edge guys develop. To me, one of my favorite positions on the football field is, an edge guy. And to be able to see an edge guy really go to work and some of the technique that they can use and the bend and the power rushes and everything else, like it's just a lot of fun for me to watch those matchups against some of these really, really talented offensive tackles in the NFL. And for a guy like Sweat to be able to kind of hold pat, never be that elite of an edge guy, coming out of college, he was certainly good, but not necessarily as elite as you would expect for one of these top end edge guys. For him to have 11 sacks, that's tied for second most on the team. They get a lot of sacks there. They have actually 3 guys with 11 sacks on the team, so he's tied with a couple other guys. But to have that many sacks in a year like this, when you're starting to kind of come into your own and really prove yourself, get yourself that next contract and all that, I'm excited for him and to see where he can go from here.
Well, tons of other guys that we loved watching in college will be taking the field this Sunday in the big game. Garrett, do you have a score prediction for the Chiefs and Eagles?
Well, let me tell you, it's a tough one to judge for me just because I think both of these teams are so good at so many different things. That's how they get to this game, right? And both teams had to beat some solid competition to get here. I think I would lean Chiefs on this one. And that's nothing to say anything bad about Philadelphia. I just think if you ask me, who do I have to trust the most in this game? I trust Pat Mahomes. He's been there. He's played well, even in losing efforts. The loss to the Buccaneers, he still played extremely well in that game. And so I'm thinking, I don't necessarily know if I have lots of confidence in a high scoring game, but I do think there will be some points. I'm going to say give me the Chiefs, maybe a 31-27 situation and
All
a
right.
failed fourth quarter effort, to maybe a last minute pick or a not quite fourth down conversion from the Eagles to seal this one.
All right, I love it. I This pains me to say as a Cowboys fan, I think I'm going to go with the Eagles. I think both of
Mm,
these teams have really underrated defenses because there's so much star power on the offensive side of the ball. I think I like Philly's defense just a little bit better. Look, we saw even last time they were out, the Bengals really gave Kansas City a lot of problems on the
mhm.
defensive side of the ball. I think the Eagles are going to do the same thing. They're good pass rush. We saw it the last time the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. I think it's going to be not as bad as it was in that game, but there's going to be pass rushers in Patrick Mahomes' face all night. And so I think that's going to be enough. I think it's a little bit lower scoring. Give me the Eagles 24-20
Oh
over the
wow, yeah.
Chiefs. Yeah.
I will say, regardless of the outcome of the game, I'm personally pumped for the halftime show. I know that
Oh,
that
yeah.
might be a little I don't know, maybe weird to say, but I love the last couple halftime shows. Obviously, with like Snoop and Dre last year, but to get Rihanna this year, I'm pumped for the halftime show. Big Rihanna fan over here. So
All
if
right.
you're not even into the NFL, just tune in for the halftime show.
Halftime show, commercials, camaraderie.
Oh
Find
yeah,
yourself find yourself a big game party, guys. And I'm saying this facetiously. I'm not scared of getting
right.
sued, but it's so funny to just listen. If you didn't realize that, guys, when you're hearing radio commercials or TV commercials, and when they say big game, it's because they're terrified of getting sued for saying Super Bowl. So if you didn't know that, now you can chuckle along with me at a really
There you
silly
go.
joke. But Garrett, thanks for a great show, man. We will be back very, very soon. Keep an eye on the YouTube for more NFL draft coverage. Keep it locked on our podcast feed and the YouTube for our weekly shows throughout the offseason, more focused on college football. And yeah, for Garrett Turney, for myself, Trey Reeves, and for Mitch, who couldn't be here this week, we'll see you guys next time.
Gracious him. How about